On this day, in 1866, determined to challenge the growing presence of the U.S. Army on their territory, Native Americans in northern Wyoming lure Lieutenant Colonel William Fetterman and his men into a deadly ambush. Tensions in the region began to rise. In 1863, when John Bozeman opened the Bozeman Trail, a new route for migrants to the Montana goldfields. However, the legality of the Bozeman Trail was questionable because it passed directly through hunting grounds that the government had promised to set aside for the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho in the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Thus, when Colorado militia killed more than 200 peaceful Cheyennes in the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, Native Americans began to retaliate by attacking whites across the Great Plains, including migrants traveling on the Bozeman Trail. The U.S. government responded by building a series of defensive forts along the trail. The largest and most important of these was Fort Phil Kearny, built in 1866 in north-central Wyoming. Native Americans, under the leadership of Red Cloud and Crazy Horse, began to concentrate their attacks on Fort Phil Kearny, constantly harassing the soldiers and ambushing groups of lumberjacks and supply carriers. On December 6, 1866, Crazy Horse discovered to his surprise that he could lure a small group of soldiers into a deadly ambush by dismounting and fleeing as if he were defenseless. Realizing the foolishness of the soldiers' impulses, Crazy Horse and Red Cloud reasoned that perhaps a much larger force could be lured into a similar deadly trap. Early in the cold morning of December 21st, some 2,000 natives took cover along the road just north of Fort Phil Kearny. A small group launched a diversionary attack on a group of woodcutters from the fort, and the commander, Colonel Henry Carrington, quickly ordered Lieutenant Colonel Fetterman to support them with a company of 80 men. Crazy Horse and 10 decoys then rode into sight of the fort. When Carrington fired a volley of artillery shells at them, the decoys fled in terror. The woodcutters made it safely back to the fort, but Fetterman and his men pursued Crazy Horse and the fleeing decoys as planned. The white soldiers rode straight into the ambush and were annihilated in a fierce attack, with some 40,000 arrows raining down on the unfortunate soldiers. None of them survived. With 81 deaths, the Fetterman Massacre was the worst defeat for the U.S. Army in the West until the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. Eventually, subsequent attacks forced the U.S. Army to reconsider its commitment to defending the Bozeman Trail, and in 1868 they abandoned the forts and withdrew. It was one of the few clear Native American victories of the Plains War.